Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, we're going to look at avoiding NPC betrayal, the recent article on Sly Flourish, next week's article of Lazy 5e, magic item prices. We are having a big sale on Sly Flourish. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the readings and reflections. Did you know I have an entire other podcast? We're going to talk about that. I'm going to show off the dice roller and point buy calculator for the Level Up Advanced 5e. I'm going to do a spotlight on the Tales of the Valiant starter set, which I just got this past weekend and had a chance yesterday to kind of dive into it. We're going to talk about that starter set. Today's big topic is D&D versus Magic the Gathering. How do we compare and contrast these two similar hobbies, somewhat related hobbies? What does it mean, in particular, looking at the business of the two, based on a couple of new bits of information that have come out in the past week that I thought were very interesting? Today's tip is going to be talking about lazy map annotation. How do we decide what kind of places exist on the maps that we use for our games? We're going to dig into that. And we have more questions from the Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. Last week on Sly Flourish, I published the article Avoid NPC Betrayal. I also recorded reading this article and a discussion about this article for Readings and Reflections. We're going to talk about Readings and Reflections a little bit. But this just came out. You can find it on the Sly Flourish website. You can also subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter to get new articles like this sent directly to your inbox. But it's a really fun article. We talked about it on Discord yesterday. You know, one near and dear to my heart. I was very happy to write this. I feel like I did a good job encapsulating the issues of having NPCs betray characters. Can you do it? Yes. Should you? It's between you and your priest. Are there other things you can do instead? Yes. And maybe you should think about doing those other things instead. So, lots to talk about NPC betrayal. You can find that. It's linked in the show notes. It's also on slyflourish.com. Next week's article is a fun one. It's kind of based on the article that I had published a month or so ago, maybe a month or 2 months ago, about magic item or treasure parcels, like lazy 5e treasure parcels. Like kind of like, how do you decide what kind of treasure the characters get when they're going on adventures? Another angle on that is magic item prices. How much should magic items sell for or buy? How much should you be able to buy a magic item for? So I came up after spending some time studying how much the recommended magic item costs for Level Up Advanced 5e, Tales of the Valiant, and D&D 2024 and D&D 2014, and came up with one that I like, which is very simple, which is 500 for uncommon, 5,000 for rare, 50,000 for very rare, and 500,000 for legendary as a baseline, as like a baseline metric. So I'm going to be talking about all of that in this next article and more, and I'm going to offer the most important thing you can do when you're offering magic items for sale, but you're going to have to read the article to find out. And you can get that article sent right to your inbox by subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. Totally free to sign up, and you'll get that article sent to you on Tuesday. We are having our twice annual big sale on Sly Flourish. This is the Sly Flourish summer sale. Right now, all books except City of Arches are 20% off on the Sly Flourish store. It's automatically calculated for you on checkout. And if your order is $60 or more, you get free shipping in the United States. So everything on sale, all the books except for City of Arches. City of Arches is too new, so we're not putting City of Arches on sale yet. We like to wait at least a year before we put a new book on sale. So all books but City of Arches are on sale right now, PDF and physical. And if you order the $60 worth, you get free shipping. So even if you're ordering a bunch of PDFs and one physical book, if your total order value is $60 or more, you'll get free shipping on the book that you do order. So that is all right now on the Sly Flourish bookstore. You can find a link to that in the show notes or go to shop.slyflourish.com. Did you know that I have an entire other podcast that I do every week? I do it every Thursday. It's about 10 to 12 minutes long. And in this podcast called Readings and Reflections, which is available to Hero Tier subscribers of the Sly Flourish Patreon, it is automatically sent out on a dedicated podcast feed for you. It's also up on Spotify. There's a little bit of stuff that you have to do to get it set up because you have your own dedicated RSS URL to get this podcast. And what I do is I take the last article, the weekly article, and I read it aloud. So if you would prefer to get Sly Flourish articles read to you like if you want to listen to them in the car and you want some commentary on the article. I spend usually about 3 or 4 minutes reading the article and then about, 7 or 8 minutes talking about the background of the article, some other thoughts that came up, some other conversations that came up since the publication of the article, some other ideas, how it came about, how it relates to other articles, all kinds of fun conversation like that. So it's a really nice way, if you would prefer to have an actual human being and the actual author of the article read it to you aloud, the best way to do that is to subscribe to Patreon as a hero tier subscriber. And you can listen to Readings and Reflections, this 10 to 12 minute dedicated podcast for Sly Flourish, where I read the most recent Sly Flourish article and then dive into some of the details and talk more about it. It's really fun to do, and people really enjoy that podcast. So please check that out. Become a patron of Sly Flourish, become a hero tier patron of Sly Flourish, and get access to Readings and Reflections. Also, if you become a patron of Sly Flourish, you get access to the Sly Flourish 5e artisanal database. I have talked about this every week for some time. I like to pick out like a tool or two to kind of show off. Today, I'm going to show off 2 tools because they're both very simple. So the 5e artisanal database is a set of tools to help you run 5e role-playing games, whether it's Tales of the Valiant, D&D 2024, Level Up Advanced 5e, or D&D 2014. It's got tools for all of them. It has the complete system reference document rule sets for all of those versions of 5e in there. It's got 3,000 monsters, thousands of spells, thousands of magic items in databases so you can search for them and find what you want, and a whole bunch of tools. 2 of the tools I'm going to point out today. One is the dice roller. So the dice roller was a tool that I developed, 6 months or a year ago. And I wanted a really simple dice roller. This actually came about because Wizards of the Coast used to have a really great dice roller available on their website. But as I have talked about before, Wizards of the Coast has a tendency of killing their old digital tools. And one of the tools that they killed was this very simple dice roller. And I had a friend of mine who said, man, I loved that dice roller. I sure wish I still had it. And I said, we ought to be able to make one of those. And so I made a dice roller. I released the code under CC0, and it's a very simple dice roller. There's no of the 3D dice going across your map or anything like that. Instead, you just click D20 and it rolls a 20, right? You get a bunch of these. You can clear your history. You want 5d8, you can roll, dice 5 and bang, it gives you 5d8, tells you what they all were and then tells you the total, right? If you have one of those old D&D 3.5 black dragons that did 24d4 damage, you can roll 24d4 and get 65. So very simple random dice roller here. You can even do custom dice. So if you want to do a d14, you can roll then you don't want to do d24, d14. You can do a d14. Right, so you can you can do a D13, right? You can do any kind of random number. So really simple dice roller. I had a friend of mine who recently used it. They were like, oh yeah, kind of working with D&D Beyond is sort of a pain. It's sort of slow. This is super fast. It's mobile friendly. Works really well. So that is the 5e artisanal database dice roller. Then one of the patrons of Sly Flourish said, what I would really love is, and we don't have on there, is a point buy calculator. So I developed a very quick point buy calculator. You want to have your stats, you want to do your points, you want to figure out where they go. It tells you have 27 points to spend. You can say, I want to have a 15 strength, which is the highest you can get in strength. Maybe you want a 14 con, and you want, some wisdom is good. We'll do a 12 wisdom. Don't shrink on charisma, 12 charisma. So 15, 14, 12, 12, 10, 8. With 1 point left to spend, you can put that point in Dex, right? Very simple dice point buy calculator for 5e. This works for D&D 2014 and D&D 2024. Tales of the Valiant does not use a point buy calculator. They instead have a different way for you to use your ability. I don't remember if Tales of the Valiant has one or not. A5e. So this works for any of the 5e systems. Very simple point buy calculator to help you build your stats. That was a request from a patron of Sly Flourish. It was pretty easy to put together and pretty easy to add to the artisanal database. So that is in the artisanal database. So those are just examples of two of many of the different tools that you get as part of the 5e artisanal database. A completely self-contained downloadable set of tools. You can click download right down here, right? You click that download your own copy. Watch this. So I click download. It downloads it. It's a 50 megabyte zip file. I'll bring up a new window. I'm going to unzip that file. Right, I now have a directory called the 5e artisanal database. In there is an index.html file, and there it is. And I have my dice roller, bang, right? And I can do the dice. Now is my local copy. It's that fast, right? Like you don't need to set up a server. You don't need to run Docker. You don't have to have a Raspberry Pi. All you need to do is download the zip file. You can open it and you have your own local copy of every one of these tools. You want to have the monster tool. You want to look up a Balor. You want the Balor from the 5.2 SRD. Bang, you got the Balor for 5.2 SRD, all loaded locally. That is all the 5e Artisanal Monster Database, a feature for patrons of Sly Flourish. Any paid patron of Sly Flourish gets access to that tool. So I have talked, I think a couple of times now, I've talked about the new D&D starter set, and I hadn't really talked about the Kobold Press starter set. I saw some previews of it, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, and then sort of lost track with it. But then during Gencon, they had a sale of the Kobold Press starter box for like $13. And even though the shipping was like $14, I was like, well, that's still a really good deal. I'm going to buy one. And now I'm sad I didn't buy a bunch of them because it is really good. So I got my copy of the Tales of the Valiant starter set. So Tales of the Valiant, if you are not aware, is a fully 5e compatible role-playing game developed by Kobold Press, who has developed many 5e products. And they partnered with Steam Forged Games to develop this. So I think that was a very smart move when you are Kobold Press is not exactly a small publisher, but they're not Wizards of the Coast. So them partnering with a group, and I know that Steamforged Games makes lots of like box sets of role-playing game products. That was a really smart move. So it is, the regular price is $45. So I think one of the things that my initial thought, this is one where like cognitive biases come into play. My initial thought was, wow, $45 is expensive for a starter set. But then Wizards of the Coast starter set is going to be $50. So now it suddenly seems like a reasonable price. Shame on me. Anyway, so it's really cool. So what does it have in here? We're going to actually take a look at all of the things that the Tales of the Valiant starter set has. Now, keep in mind, this is not sponsored. I bought my own copy of it. So it has tokens that you can punch out for all of the different monsters that exist in all 5 of the adventures that exist in here. So it's got two sets of them. I didn't pop them out yet. My only disappointment is the backside are just black tokens, which I presume is definitely cut down on the price. I actually like the Monster Vault tokens from back in the 4th edition had the Bloodied version, and I'm pretty sure Bloodied is an actual condition in Tales of the Valiant. So they could have had like a little red ring and have the same monster. The real advantage of that is when they're all in a box, it's really easy to find the monster you want, because otherwise you got a bunch, half of them are face up, half of them are face down, and it's a little harder to sort. So, but all different kinds of monster tokens that are in here, and these are pretty reusable, right? You can actually use these for a lot of different things. So, pretty good. Like there's, a bunch of a bunch of little skeleton ones. Those are definitely reusable. There's a phase spider that you could use for a bunch of different things. So flying snakes, a lot of different tokens. So those are like the punch out tokens, which we have seen in products before. A whole bunch of maps. One of my initial complaints when I saw the map pack was that some of the maps have maps on one side, like that. And these are all dry erasable maps, so they're very high quality maps. But then has like a poster of the game on the other. And it's like, that poster's not super useful. And actually what I would have preferred is if they had done a blank poster map, right? That would have given us a bit more utility out of this set to actually have a break. Because like, I'm not going to put that on my wall, right? I need the map on the other side. So having the poster isn't super useful. But having the maps on the high quality thing is. Now, why did they do it that way? They did it that way because they don't need all the maps. So some of these are double-sided, right? And they're different sizes. This one's a lot bigger. This one has like a great big hedge maze on one side, and then it's got a big dungeon on the other. This is like your full, 2 foot by 3 foot sort of map on it. That one is double-sided. And then they have another one that's equally big that is one-sided with another big sort of Monster Vault art. And the art is cool. I'm not knocking the art. But it would have been nicer. Like that, you could have given me a C one, like a C texture on the other side. So I could have used, instead of having poster maps on the other side, I think having some like usable maps on the other side would have been really good. But the maps are very high quality. So there's, I think, 4 total maps that come in the starter set that are on wet and dry erasable laminated maps, like the Paizo flip mats that I'm always talking about. So then you get into the books. There's a whole set of books in here. There's 4 different books. Welcome to Role-Playing Games, which is a good introduction. I read this yesterday, and I was like, yeah, that's a good solid introduction to what RPGs are and how they play out. It's got QR codes, so you can go watch people play RPGs, which I think is very smart. Very well produced, nice glossy pages, right? It's they look good. Nice artwork, good stuff. So there's a little pamphlet to get you started. There's a rules reference. The one thing I noticed that the rules reference did not have was equipment to buy. So the equipment is really already on your sheets, so they didn't include that. But it would have been nice to have sort of a, hey, if you go to town, what kind of stuff can you buy in town? There isn't really anything like that. But this isn't a full RPG. This is really designed to be a starter set for role-playing games. But it does have the basics of role-playing, the basics of 5e all in, and this one's a 52-page, like a 51-page book. It has descriptions of the spells that the characters in the pre-gens will be using. Then there's 2 adventure books. The first adventure book is called Introductory Adventures and then Advanced Adventures. The introduction one actually has 3 adventures in it. The first one is a complete solo adventure. Now, I didn't play through the solo adventure, so I don't know, like, how much is it like a real adventure and how much is it just kind of showing you how characters work and having you do some rolls and stuff like that. But for a brand new GM, it's probably very useful because it has lots of breakouts here that talk about what exactly ability checks are. How do you use advantage and disadvantage? How do saving throws work, right? And all of the sort of circumstances in the solo adventure work out. My only complaint there is that the character, they have a character sheet, which is really interesting, for your solo character that is classless. Right? It does not have a class, or it is just a basic first level character with, none of like the normal stuff that a character has. No class-based stuff. Their name is Cabbage. I don't know why they decided that Cabbage would be a good name for a character. That doesn't exactly fill me with, heroic awe, but hey, whatever. So they do have some kind of talents and things like that. And so this character sheet is designed to be used with that solo adventure. Then there are 4 other pre-gen characters that are included in here. They're folded in half. They include pages that have their spells. I would really love to see Kobold Press and Steamforge Games put these out in PDFs. They have them. You can go to the Steamforge site and download them from there. So that's good. But I think you have to kind of like add all 4 to your cart and then check out and stuff like that. It would be great if it was like a single PDF that had all of the characters with all the stuff in it so that those could be like, hey, here are the default 4 classes for Kobold Press Tales of the Valiant when you want to get started. And they include Zalbakur, a Kobold Warlock, kind of fun. Canet, a Barbarian. I don't know. They are a Bearfolk Barbarian, a Beastkin Barbarian. Gadia Zaid, a human fighter. And Unthar Shaleheart, a first level dwarf wizard. So you have a fighter, barbarian, warlock, and wizard are your classes. No cleric and no rogue, which is pretty interesting. So one thing I do kind of like about it is these are different kinds of characters than you would expect from any other 5e game. That means that the Tales of the Valiant set is really going to feel different than the D&D starter set that's coming out. So in the introductory adventures, I said there's a solo adventure. Then there are 2 adventures from first and second level. First level adventure and second level adventure that are pretty straightforward dungeon crawls. All the monster stats are in the back of the book. And then in advanced adventures, which is 3rd and 4th level. So you actually get, the whole tier 1 experience playing through all of the adventures in here. I only gave a skim read of the adventures. I didn't dive in deep, and I certainly haven't run them. So I don't know the quality of the adventures, but they certainly look good. Lots of read aloud text, lots of art, lots of descriptions about how adventures run, and they look like fun stuff. So even if you are an experienced 5e GM, you're going to have some fun playing with that stuff. It comes with a set of dice. It looks like the basic set of dice. It doesn't have the expanded 11 set, but that's fine, right? There's enough dice in here that you can run. Pretty blue, very high contrast color. That works out. Then another thing that they have that the D&D starter set is not is actual miniatures. So they are unpainted. There are 4 of them, 1 for each of the characters, and they are really good looking minis. Really cool. You could definitely paint these. You could paint them, but you don't have to. I would definitely be absolutely fine dropping these miniatures on the table and having a fun time with them. So the minis look really, really cool. That's another thing that you kind of get with the Steamforge game that you're not typically going to see with another starter set. I know in the case of the D&D starter set that the character tokens are cardboard stand-ups. So that's fine too. They kind of have a different levels of quality from what I have seen of the starter sets in various, pictures of it online and stuff like that. So that is the Tales of the Valiant starter set. It is a very cool product. I think it looks really cool. Boy, it was a hell of a good deal when it was on sale for $13. Like, I'm sure they were losing, given the stuff that's in here, they were definitely losing money on each one that they had. But even at $45, especially if you can find it at a local game shop, so you're not also paying like $12 for shipping, it is a very cool pack. Cool adventures. If you already have like the Tales of the Valiant books, you're already kind of happy with what you got, you certainly don't need to pick this up. But if you are interested in kind of a good, solid 5e starter set, maybe you want one that isn't D&D, this one looked very cool. So that is the Tales of the Valiant starter set, available from Steamforged Games. Very, very cool product. One of the things that's interesting about this is we are in a tremendously good time for box set, role-playing game box sets. While I was looking at this, I was like, man, I got so many cool box sets here. I have Mothership. I picked up Mothership. I haven't played it yet. I really want to play Mothership. But I was like, I heard really good things about it. And I picked up Mothership. Really cool box set for Mothership. Dragonbane, really heavy. I think might be one of the best box sets I've ever seen. It's again, kind of hitting that $45, $50 price tag, but it has the entire core book inside the box set. So if you buy the box set, it's like getting the equivalent of the PHB, Monster Manual, and DMG along with the box set that you pick up. So Dragonbane is really cool. I've only played one game of Dragonbane. I'm actually hoping to run Dragonbane for one of my other groups when we finish up with the games that we're playing there. So the Dragonbane box set is really cool. In the future, I am going to do a review of the Cairn box set. I've been reading a lot about Cairn. Yohai Gal, the developer of Cairn, is a really cool guy. I actually convinced my Wednesday group to play a few sessions of Cairn once we're done with our 20th level 3x5e game. I was like, we need I'd like a palate cleanser and go to a very sort of simple old school style game. Let's try just a couple of sessions of Cairn and see how it goes. But the Cairn box set is also really cool. And then I got the Nimble 5e box set. This one was, I think all of these other ones were ones that I bought. This one was a preview copy sent to me, and I haven't even had a chance to open it up yet, but I can tell you, I have opened it up. I have opened up the box set, and it is a tremendously good-looking box set for Nimble, which is quoted as a fast, tactical, 5e compatible role-playing game. I really want to dive into this more. I have a big stack of stuff on my desk, but it looks really cool too. And the box set is really nice. There's so many good-looking box sets that are available for role-playing games. And my desk is getting completely crowded with these things. I don't know where I'm going to put them all. So, really good time for box sets, I'll tell you. So I'll probably dive into more of these in future episodes, but I wanted to kind of show off and be like, man, there's so many good box sets that are out there these days. And the Kobold Press box set is an example of one of them. This is probably not going to come as any major surprise to a lot of folks, but sometimes I think we get confused in the conversation. And a couple of things sort of, showed up in front of me in this past week that got me really thinking about this topic, which is that the fundamental difference in the business models and the gameplay styles of Magic the Gathering and D&D. Now, again, we know that Magic the Gathering is a collectible card game, and Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game. But they are both the two major products of one company, Wizards of the Coast. And there's other similarities between them as well. And there's other sort of Venn diagrams of people who play both Magic and D&D, or people that used to play D&D and then moved to Magic, or vice versa. There's also some bleed over in that there's a D&D set for Magic the Gathering, a D&D set of cards for Magic the Gathering, and there are several Magic the Gathering game worlds that have campaign books for D&D. So these things tend to kind of flow together. But the fundamental business model between Magic the Gathering and D&D are extremely different, even though they sit under the same company. And sometimes, though I'm certain if you talk to any individual at Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and mention that different business model, they will nod their heads. They know this. They're not idiots. They work there. It's their business to know these differences. But every so often we see things that make it look like they are pretending that they can be the same. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those, but I think sometimes we see that Hasbro believes that they can be kind of the same, and they cannot. They are fundamentally different kinds of products sold in different ways with different audiences doing different things. I think that D&D likely does best when Hasbro isn't paying attention to it. And when they are acting as truly acting. We hear them say this a lot. I've definitely heard people at Wizards of the Coast say that we are stewards of the D&D brand. We are stewards of the game. And I think it works best when they maintain themselves as stewards of the game, which means that it will come as no surprise to them that D&D will never do as well as Magic does from a business perspective. And maybe they should be okay with that. Maybe they should recognize the fact that D&D in its fundamental model, that you cannot copy over the same kind of things that you're doing with Magic. So a couple of things popped up that I wanted to kind of that kind of collate together into this kind of fundamental topic. And recognize this is kind of the hobby of the tabletop role-playing game industry punditry, more so than like things that really matter to you in your game. When you want things that matter to you in your game, we're going to talk about that next. But I wanted to kind of dive into this because I think it is interesting, and I think we have conversations as hobbyists in this industry that we talk about Magic, we talk about D&D, we see the things that are going on. And I think it can help us, if we're watching the kind of industry a bit, to kind of recognize these sort of fundamental issues of D&D and Magic, to understand how they operate together. And when we can see wizards doing things that you're like, yeah, that's never going to work, right? It's just not going to work the same way. And yet they tend to make the same mistakes. So this is a really interesting thing that just showed up last week. I saw it first as like an Instagram post that was getting sent around, and then did some of my own research. But, according to Chris Cox, which by the way is misspelled in this transcript. So the Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering set, which came out earlier this year, according to Chris Cox, the chief executive officer, during an earnings call, he said the following quote: In terms of Final Fantasy and how it met expectations, I'll give you a comparison between two of our biggest universes at the onset. Lord of the Rings took 6 months to deliver $200 million of revenue. Final Fantasy took 1 day, and we left demand on the table. This came from a transcript from investing.com, a transcript of Chris Cox's statements that he gave during the earnings call for D&D. $200 million in 1 day for the Final Fantasy version of Magic the Gathering, right? That would be the equivalent of selling 4 million D&D player handbooks, which is probably on the outside of the possible number of total player handbooks sold in 10 years, right? Now that data we don't really have, but we can kind of extrapolate it a little bit. Teos Abadia, my friend Teos over on alphastream.com, has an article where he talked about the book scan data. And it said, and in his article, he brought two kinds of things together that made it look like, that basically said, like, we know they sold 1.5 million copies of the Player's Handbook over the 10 years. And they probably sold at least 20% more than that. But even if we just go way to the outside and say digital copies, Amazon copies, local game shops, retail shops, if we look at everything together, 4 million copies of the Player Handbook is probably on the outside edge of the possible number of Player's Handbooks, right? And that took 10 years to sell. And Magic sold one Magic the Gathering set, and they made that in they didn't earn that. This is gross. We're measuring gross revenue. They earned the same amount of gross revenue in 1 day. 1 day. That to me just shows the scale difference of the industry of D&D and Magic. I have heard from other people, I've heard other people mention that they had talked to game shop owners who said things like, when there's a new Magic the Gathering release, that they do like an early release and an early tournaments and stuff, they earn enough money from those early releases to pay for their shop's full operations until the next early release. Magic the Gathering, I don't think comes as any surprise. Magic the Gathering isn't just like so much bigger. They personally, that one brand and one business is propping up thousands of game shops across the world. That's how they operate, is selling that. There is no game shop that is selling enough D&D stuff to be able to offset its costs, right? There's not enough D&D stuff sells to be able to keep a store going. It's just like a physical local game shop going. I think that's something that we need to keep in our minds when we're thinking about this. The other angle to this conversation that came in was a very interesting Gencon panel given by Ben Riggs, who wrote Slaying the Dragon, I think I have that right, who is kind of like a D&D researcher and academic type. And he did a panel called Solving the Mysteries of the D&D Business. Ben Riggs is a bit of a controversial figure in this area. He's made some statements like D&D is dead or D&D is dying, and it kind of got every people fired up. He did bring up at the beginning of his convention that like, hey, Matt Colville has blocked me on Twitter. I don't know exactly why you would brag about the fact that Matt Colville blocked you on Twitter, but hey, whatever. In any case, I know that he is not a favorite of many people. However, one thing he does very well is he goes and interviews lots of people who used to work at Wizards of the Coast, and he gets direct quotes from people. So the data that he gets, the information he gets, the quotes he gets are really pretty solid. And he brought up a lot of these quotes in this episode called Solving the Mysteries of the D&D Business, which if you are interested in RPG business punditry is probably a very good podcast or video to watch or podcast to listen to. The video actually has the slides that he was giving at this, so that can be pretty good. And he had lots of interesting stories about the business side of D&D. And I don't know if it was his central premise, but a central theme that I got from his talk was that pretty much since Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast, and given that Wizards of the Coast had bought TSR more recently and then made a third edition of D&D, ever since Hasbro had purchased Wizards of the Coast and which included D&D, they have wanted D&D to be a digital product and a digital brand since like the early 2000s. And every time they're almost on the edge of doing something with that, they pull it back and they kind of pull back the money, they pull back the resources, they change things, and then it doesn't work out. And they have done this many times over the past 25 years, including just recently with Sigil. And some of that comes from the fact that they look over at Magic. Now this part I'm speculating, right? I'm speculating on this part. I don't have any data to back this up. That it could be that they are looking over at Magic. They're seeing the popularity of Magic. They think if we could get D&D into a digital space like that, we'd be able to kind of build this brand up like that. And there was one time where Chris Cox, my friends Sean Merwin and Teo Sabadia on Mastering Dungeons had a wonderful episode a few years back where they talked about this, where Chris Cox gave his desire to have both D&D and Magic be billion-dollar brands, each of them. Now, there's only two ways that you're going to have two brands, D&D and Magic, that both hit an equal amount of revenue. And one of them is to take D&D and make it many, probably a couple of orders of magnitude bigger in scale in order to catch up to Magic. Recalling $200 million in one day versus $200 million over 10 years. Right? Like, keep that comparison. How much more does D&D have to be to catch up to Magic? Or Magic falls to the point where it's at the level of D&D, which I don't think is what you actually want. I think it is almost an impossibility to get D&D to the point where it makes the same revenue as Magic, because the only way that you could really do that is with the branding of D&D, D&D movies, D&D tennis shoes, D&D sandwich meats, right? Like spreading the D&D marketing side so wide that you're endorsing all these things, Stranger Things, live play shows, all this sort of stuff, that you're getting the brand of D&D so big that the revenue manages to come back to make it a billion-dollar brand. But it's not like you're going to stop doing that for Magic. Magic also has a bunch of worlds. Magic also has the opportunity for movies and TV shows. Why would you stop the marketing for Magic in order to do it for D&D just to get it so that these two things are even? You probably do it with Magic more. And Magic, the business model for Magic is so much better at generating money. It would make more money, right? So I think that there's no way that those things are equal. But Chris Cox did say that, right? And that to me is one of two main pieces of evidence I have that Wizards of the Coast has tried to make D&D like Magic and failed. And the other one is kind of more recently. So there's lots of interesting stuff that Ben Riggs gives in his talk, which I highly recommend. But there was a couple things that really stuck out to me, and some that we know pretty well. So one of them that we know pretty well is when 4th edition of D&D came out, after 30.5, when 4th edition came out, that they were really worried about World of Warcraft. And they were like, we want to get some of that juicy World of Warcraft money. They brought Rob Hainsou and Jonathan Tweed on board and said, you don't have to stick to the legacy of D&D. You can make the game you want. They did not build a game based on World of Warcraft, but they definitely built a game that was intended to bring people from World of Warcraft over into D&D. And lots of arguments that go online about that thing. So I'm not going to get involved in the arguments. But a big part of that was digitization. They had huge plans for building a whole 3D virtual table. This is going to sound familiar. Building a whole virtual tabletop for it, character builders, monster things, a whole environment that was going to make D&D like World of Warcraft. It was going to be an MMO and everything, but it being an actual MMO. And they did an interview. So I remember hearing Rob Hainsou and Jonathan Tweet talking with the former CEO of Wizards of the Coast, Peter Atkinson, on his wonderful series of roundtables where he talked about the design of every edition. And one of the things, it might have been Andy Collins who said this. It was either Andy Collins or Rob Hainsou, I'm pretty sure, who said that I'm paraphrasing, these aren't the exact details, but it's something along the lines of, we worked with an external company to make 3D models for certain monsters. And after like 2 months, they had like 12 models, and we had like 350 models to do. Right? And it was very clear from the scale of what they were trying to do, they were never going to reach that. So hang on to that a second, because it comes up again in a bit. More recently, this was very interesting. He talked about how it was Nathan Stewart, who was the previous brand manager for D&D. He was the first vice president for Dungeons and Dragons during the building of 5th edition. Now, anytime you're talking about like a vice president or like an executive that's there, you always have to keep in mind that like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they actually were the one actively involved in making something happen or not. A lot of time with executives, they're in the right place at the right time. And I've been in this role, not in a VP role, but I've definitely been in a role where like me being able to take advantage of the fact that good circumstances took place happens a lot. So they could have been in different circumstances. But my understanding, and from Ben's conversation, he said that Nathan Stewart went to the head of Larian, met with the head of Larian, and said, we'd like you guys to do Baldur's Gate 3. And Larian said, yeah, we'd love to do Baldur's Gate 3. And he offered 2 license agreements. One, a 60% majority shareholder, or majority share, where Wizards of the Coast would be the primary producer of the game, but Larian would be sort of like the group that they contract with to build it. Or a 40% share, where they're the minority shareholder. Larian would have 60% of it, but Wizards would definitely be more heavily involved and stuff like that. And Sven, I think, from Larian said, yeah, either of those are good. And you know, this is the hearsay and happenstance of different interviews. And Nathan went back to Wizards of the Coast and said, okay, we've got a good company. They're ready to make Baldur's Gate 3. I've got it. We can either do a 60% or 40% share. And Wizard executives, the other vice presidents, and probably Chris Cox said, no, let's just do a license agreement instead, right? Whatever the license agreement, which is probably on the order of 5%. Right, we're going to do just a regular old D&D license agreement instead of these 60% or 40% split. Now, it's really easy to look back and be like, wow, that was a dumb move, right? Given that it was the game of the year. But Liz Shue, who was the head of marketing at the time, was quoted by Ben as saying, very likely, if we had been in a greater partner, we would have made them release it too early and it wouldn't have been nearly as good as it was. So the answer was, it probably worked out best for us, for Baldur's Gate 3, and for Wizards of the Coast, who probably, or maybe, made more money because the game came out when it did, as good as it was. It was game of the year by far. So, and then they still got their license fee from it. So, you know, so that's pretty interesting, right? And that gets into this idea that Wizards likes to get to the edge of the digital side and then pulls it back. I would argue there's only one time that they've really invested serious money in a digital space for D&D and had it succeed really well. And that's D&D Beyond. D&D Beyond cost $140 million to buy D&D Beyond. $140 million. That's a ton of money. One thing that Ben said is that when Nathan Stewart was the VP and head of D&D, that he went to Wizards and said, I would like to build a digital tool. Now that we have 5th edition and it's popular, I'd like to build a digital tool front, and I need $5 million to do so, or something like that. And they said, no, we're not going to give you $5 million to do that. And then they pay $140 million for D&D Beyond later. Now, again, it could be that D&D Beyond is way better than anything they would have developed internally. So who could say, right? We can't say that they would have had better. But it's possible that if they had invested in D&D Beyond earlier, before it got bought out by Curse, or before it got bought out by Fandom, they might have been able to get it for a lot less money, right? Who knows? So that's some of the kind of the crazy sort of digital business side. So the other part of the Wizards sometimes thinks that they're going to get magic money out of D&D was with 1D&D. So I didn't really know about. Chris Kao, who I believe was a video game executive before he joined Wizards of the Coast, was over on the Magic side. And while he was over on the Magic side, they released Magic Arena. And I think Magic Arena like doubled their revenue in a year, right? Magic Arena is essentially like a giant wood chipper that spews money out the side, right? Because now it's all digital. They get, the markup is really high. The cost is really low, especially per card, and their own take of the revenue is much, much higher. So Magic Arena is really popular. People really like Magic Arena. I played Magic Arena and I really liked it. It's a very solid platform. It's really fun game to play. So spewed money out from Magic Arena, right? Arena is really, really good. Oh, Scipio says, no, Arena is maybe 20 to 30% of Magic revenue. at the time, well, 50% would be double, right? So, and at the time, I remember that they literally had one. This was years ago. That there was when Magic Arena came out, that the revenue literally for Magic doubled in one quarter, and it was right when Arena came out. So now it might be only 20 to 30%, but I think, and again, I don't have the data to back it up. It was around that, but I'll give you, we'll say 30%. That's still a lot of money, especially when you're talking about like $200 million revenue on one package. That's a lot of money that's going out there, right? So Arena's overhead is really, really low. And so Chris Kao was over there when that happened. They moved Chris Kao over to the D&D side. And that was around the one D&D side thing. And they said, we're going to make Sigil, right? We're going to make a 3D virtual tabletop, a digital version of D&D where you can play. And it's even going to be something that other brands inside Hasbro can use. That's why we saw a Transformer in it at one point. You remember there was like hey, is that Optimus Prime in my D&D game? Right? That they were going to bring it over there. Didn't work out, right? In fact, there was remember when I talked about how long it took them to make miniatures, 3D models for 4th edition, according to Ben Riggs, and I think he said he either got this from Andy Collins, I think he said he got it from Andy Collins, that they had a developer who was working full-time on spell effects for Sigil, who got like 30 spell effects done in 2 years, and they had 300 to do. Right? Same problem, that it turns out that getting all of the assets that you need for all of these spells for this 3D virtual tabletop platform does not scale well at all. As we know, of course, they decimated the staff of Sigil, I think literally, right? I think it was 10 to 1, right? So they decimated the staff of Sigil, leaving about 3 developers, including firing Andy Collins again, right? He got fired during the 4th edition time, then he got fired again later, which sucks for Andy Collins, because they and then they pull back. And they're still like marketing Sigil. Like they still put out miniatures and stuff like that, but they cut way more. And that's that example of like getting close to a thing or trying a thing and then pulling back. It's a lot of wasted, in my opinion, a lot of wasted energy. The reality is these are just totally different business models, which is not great for Wizards of the Coast as they struggle to try to make D&D more than it is. But it's really fantastic for us because the fundamental business problem that Wizards faces is a thing that's advantageous to us, which is the 50-year hamburger problem. I bring up the 50-year hamburger because it's one of my favorite quotes from Penny Arcade, where they said, the issue with D&D Beyond is that you're essentially buying a hamburger once and then you and your friends eat that hamburger for 50 years, right? That's the kind of the 50-year hamburger problem, that you don't really need to buy another role-playing game product. There are people who are playing BX right now. There are people who are playing 1st, 2nd, 3rd edition of D&D right now. And every time they sell us a new version of D&D and we buy it, that is a version of D&D we're going to have on our tables and could be running forever. We don't need to go back. Magic is actually kind of the same way, but it doesn't seem to play out that way. You don't really need more Magic cards, but people buy more Magic cards at a much different pace than they buy D&D stuff. So it's just a fundamentally different business model. But that business model is really good for us because we get to buy a product, we get to own that product, and we can use that product as long as we want. We can decide whether or not to buy the next product or not. There's no drive. There's no ambition that we have to go pick up the next book. We only pick it up if we think that that's going to be a book that's going to actually help us or that's something that we want that works well. So there's a lot of other aspects to this conversation. Something like D&D and Magic Commander. The Commander style of format for Magic is actually very much like a D&D style. It was community driven. It has more than 2 players. It's a very, and you know, I have a friend of mine who's a big Magic guy, and he says like it's a much more casual format. 100 card decks, only 1 card of any type in the deck. Commanders that are there. You know, it's less competitive, but it's still competitive. And it was very popular. And then Wizards made it an official style in 2011, releasing actual product lines for Commander because it was so popular. There were community groups outside of Wizards of the Coast called the Commander Rules Committee that used to decide the rules. That worked until they banned 4 cards that removed tens of millions of dollars of value from people's Magic cards. It's so bad that they got death threats, at which point Magic said, we're going to take over this group. And then my understanding is more recently they have opened that group back up again so that there are community group members that are part of this committee that decides on Magic formats and stuff like this. On the Magic Commander side, they went to Wizards and said, we want you to take this over. We don't want to manage this anymore. So yeah, the other thing I heard was that Wizards went to them when they found out that they were going to be banning those 4 cards and asked them, please don't. And they did anyway and caused this huge backlash. It was actually 2 of the 4 cards. I think everyone agreed that 2 of the cards were good, but one of the cards was specifically a card that really only works in Commander, which is really funny. So that the angle of Magic Commander is kind of an interesting allegory with like what it feels like to kind of play D&D and stuff like that. The other thing is, think about the third-party market for this. The third-party market for Magic the Gathering basically doesn't exist. You're essentially selling cards, the same Magic cards. So there's a secondary market card where you open up packs, you find the rare ones, and you sell those. But there's nobody making new Magic cards. But there are people making new D&D things all the time. So the third-party world for D&D, especially when you open it up to all of 5e, which is all compatible, so much richer than what exists for Magic. Imagine if other companies could make Magic-compatible cards that people played. That's kind of what we have with D&D. And it's wonderful that we have that, right? I think it's wonderful that we have that. There's a huge creative market for people that want to kind of build off of D&D, which is 5e in this circumstance. But even still, like you look at games like Old School Essentials, which are building off of the old D&D BX, much richer environment, creative environment. Now, of course, there are other companies that are making collectible card games all over the place. So you could kind of argue that, well, that's sort of the equivalent of the third-party market for role-playing games and for D&D and for 5e. Is almost like companies that are making their own CCGs, but you cannot have anything that's compatible with Magic, where we have tons of stuff that's compatible with D&D. Then we have sort of like the what happened with the OGL. You could almost see that they saw we have so much greater control over Magic, what happens there, and we don't have that with D&D, particularly like with Solasta. And the rumor is that Chris Cox saw Solasta, and he saw things like IGN, who referred to the game Solasta as might be the Dungeons & Dragons video game we deserve, and it wasn't D&D, it was using the OGL. The rumor that Ben brought up is that one of the things that targeted the OGL for destruction back during the OGL catastrophe was Solasta, that this game in particular. By the way, I played Solasta, and it really is a fantastic D&D game. But of course, Baldur's Gate 3 came out, and it was fine too. And we are where we are now with the OGL. Now we don't worry about the OGL. Now we got the SRDs in the Creative Commons, and things are much better. So I have a doomer prediction. My doomer prediction is, given how much money Wizards of the Coast has spent on D&D Beyond, $140 million, that the minute the profit margins on D&D Beyond might dip, which they could for any number of reasons, Wizards might be much faster at ripping it out than it might look, because the costs to keep it up could be high. And if there's an opportunity to use that $140 million, and this is one where I'm not an accountant and I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a business guy, so I don't really know if they could do that. Could they mark that off as an expense the same way that TV and movie studios now will make a movie or a TV show and put it up on streaming and then see that it's not really a big hit and rip it back? Even though it was still making money, they rip it back because then they can make it a tax loss, right? Then they can count it as a loss and get a big tax write-off for it. Is D&D Beyond in a position where Hasbro could use it as a tax write-off? I don't know. It might be too late because they've already spent that kind of money on it, or it already was a tax write-off because they spent the $140 million in the first place. But is there the possibility? I don't know that this is even. I wouldn't say it's an impossible. I don't know if it's probable either, though. But if you think about the revenue lines for D&D Beyond, if it gets to the point where the revenue lines are below the cost to maintain it, Wizards might be really quick at stopping it. And then D&D Beyond disappears, which is this thing, a worry that I have talked about for some time. I don't really know. It could be that D&D Beyond lasts for years and years and years. But maybe not. And we don't really know. So in conclusion, D&D can never be Magic the Gathering. That's the fundamental kind of message that I get from this, that the fundamental business model of D&D, the way it works, the way it's played, the revenue that it generates, all the kind of stuff, Magic and D&D cannot compare to one another. They're not even in the same style. And talking to some friends of mine, they're like, I'm not even sure why you're talking about this, because of course they're not the same. But every so often it feels like Hasbro tries to pretend they are the same. With the, hey, we digitized Magic Arena, let's go do that same thing over for D&D and have the same executive in charge of the thing. Oh, it didn't work out? Let's fire him. That's one. Or taking down Sigil after the amount of time. But also them saying, we want both of them to be billion-dollar brands. That's just impossible. But in the meantime, what I have heard, and this is something that my friends Sean and Teo said, is as soon as you have a senior executive or the CEO of a company saying, I would like to build D&D into a billion-dollar brand, that isn't necessarily good news for D&D. Right? That level of attention from executives doesn't always lead to good places. And instead, maybe D&D is best off being the brand that Hasbro simply maintains, that they act as a steward for D&D, recognizing that its business model is never going to be like any of the other business models that they have. They're not going to be able to get magic-like money out of it, but they still want to maintain it. And that was some of what they were able to do when 5th edition came out, which was by far the most popular version of D&D. How do you annotate your maps for D&D? So a lot of time, I think what GMs do, I don't have a lot of data on this, but I've definitely talked to a lot of DMs that do this, is they will either create a map or they will find a map, and then they will put annotations on that map for every single room that exists in that map, which is pretty time consuming. Making a map is very time consuming, particularly when you have professional map makers like Dyson who have 1,300 maps available that you can choose from. I'm always a big fan of picking maps. But then even annotating those maps can actually be pretty tricky as well. I love doing dungeon crawls. I love doing infiltration adventures. I'm doing one just in a short period of time here. And I love to have quick ways to be able to annotate a map. So I'm going to offer an alternative way to assign categories to rooms, to assign room stuff that doesn't require you actually fully annotating a map. And that's listing the chambers in your notes instead of annotating the map directly. So here is an example. All right, this is an example map that I'm using in my Wednesday game. The characters are actually down in this dungeon right now. They're about to face a Death Tyrant down in this. So 16th level characters that are going to face a Death Tyrant. And instead of me like printing out this map and taking a Sharpie and drawing map annotations on it, or using like the 5e artisanal database map annotator and putting maps on it, I said for a quicker way for me to be able to do this is I choose a map that fits well enough to the situation that I'm going to run. And then I list things out just in a list. And you can see it in this example here, where I call this map, I call it the Marrow Vaults. And in the Marrow Vaults, I had a few ideas that sort of hit my head, and I just write them on a list. River Styx, Archway to Savandra's Office, Vault of Forbidden Tomes, Underworld Ziggurat, Cracked Obsidian Sarcophagus, Necrotic Laboratory, Squirming Refuse Pit, Sacrilegious Treasure Vault, Shrine to the Pale Lord, and Pain Amplifier, right? And I don't have to necessarily assign every one of these labels to every particular room in the map. Instead, I can, depending on where the characters go, I can decide which one of these things fits that. Now, many times as you read these, if you look at the map and you read these descriptions, you can tell they are really set for a specific place. Right? That when I talk about the Underworld Ziggurat, you're like, well, it's either that giant ziggurat on the right or the smaller ziggurat on the left, right? That could be Crackstone Obsidian Sarcophagus, that could be anywhere. Necrotic Laboratory, that could be anywhere. River Styx, probably that big river that's carved right through the place. So some of these fit specific places, but other ones I can kind of move around to different places. This kind of fits the same idea of secrets and clues, where I can have a bunch of different secrets the characters could pick up, but I don't define where they're going to pick them up, which means I can drop those secrets in and improvise their revelation during play. In the same way, I don't know what path the characters are going to pick when they go through this dungeon. And I can decide based on where they go, now when they go there, now I know which one of these labels I might want to use. And then I can start to fill it out more with having my monsters in one side and my locations in another. So it's a good way to kind of keep your notes clean and make it easy for you to quickly write out the things in your maps. It takes, 5 minutes to go through and say like, yeah, these are the different locations that could exist in this place. And you don't even need to fill out every single one of them. In fact, this one had fewer chambers. Like I came up with 10, and this one doesn't even really have 10 chambers that I needed. So in some cases, you might not even need 10, but a lot of times, even if your map has 15 rooms, you can still do 10 locations because you're not going to hit every single one of the 15 rooms. You're probably only going to hit 7 or 8 of them, depending on where they go. So this is a really good way to kind of fill in the locations. Now, if you're having trouble coming up with ideas for these sorts of locations, I've got something for you. I have a list of 20 chamber descriptions. So we have 15 different common dungeons, each one which has 20 different chamber descriptions that are available for free under a Creative Commons license in the Lazy GM resource document. I will link to it in the show notes. And the 15 locations we have are Beast Den, Castle, Caverns, Derelict Ship, Dragon's Lair, Forgotten Vaults, Manor, Mines, Necropolis, Prison, Sewers, Sunken Grotto, Thieves' Den, Unholy Temple, and Wizard's Tower. Those to me were like the 15 typical kinds of dungeons. And of course, you can change these around. And then we have 20 different location names for each of those. So if you're looking for some inspiration to get your head in the right place, you can do these. Tie them to your factions, and now you can really build these out. Throw some conditions on there, like an oozing priest dormitory, or an infernal summoning circle, or a draconic private altar, and now you have some really interesting things that you can do to fill out these locations. But you don't have to go through the trouble of like opening up image editors and dropping annotations on these maps for every single location. Instead, you can give yourself a list of these potential locations and just drop them right into your notes so that when you're navigating a dungeon, when you're navigating a location, you can drop in these various things when you need them. So that's my quick trick for lazy map annotation. It's something I've been doing a lot for my Sunday games. I've actually been doing a lot for most of my games. And I thought it would be something interesting to share with you. Every quarter on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have the Patreon Q&A. Every month, patrons can ask any RPG-related question, and every Friday I answer those questions. Some of those questions I bring here to the show so that we can dive into them a little deeper. Jackson F. says, I am currently making a website that is a D&D Beyond alternative. While it's good, I feel there are a lot of issues with D&D Beyond that I want to address. Software that runs better and can be stored locally, yay. Built a better UI that is more interactable with abilities similar to Baldur's Gate 3, easier implementation of homebrew and third-party rules and content, and better tools for GMs such as a better encounter maker, content sharing, etc. My main question I wanted to ask, if you could add any feature to this, what would you want to see? Keeping in mind that this is still an indie thing with no official backing. What tools would you like to see available for players and GMs? Big question. And I've been thinking a lot about this kind of thing because I've been working on the 5e artisanal database, which is a similar sort of thing. I want to have a bunch of tools that are focused for game masters to be able to run 5e games that they can download and keep and run just in their local browser without having to have any kind of big website or signups or any kind of thing like that. What I think is really interesting is if you look at D&D Beyond, I talk about D&D Beyond a lot, but if one of the things you look at with D&D Beyond, if D&D Beyond didn't have a character builder, I don't know that anybody would use it. So it's got a lot of useful features, right? It's got the D&D Beyond Maps feature, which is really good. The searching and being able to like find different things in books, the search is, give or take, depending on what you're kind of searching for is one thing. The monster lookups are not bad. Being able to pull up a monster stat block is fine. But really, like the reason why it's as popular as it is, probably the reason why they spent $140 million to buy it is because of the character builder. If it didn't have a character builder, it wouldn't be very well used. An example of that is there's support for Tales of the Valiant over on Demiplane, but there isn't a character builder. And so you never really hear anybody that talks about using Tales of the Valiant on Demiplane because there isn't a character builder over there. They keep saying they want to make a 5e character builder over there, but they haven't yet. And until there is one, there's no character builder over there, then I don't think Demiplane is going to be a very strong place to play 5e games. The interesting thing is Roll20, which owns Demiplane, Roll20 does have 5e character builders, multiple 5e character builders, and 5e is played very heavily over on D&D Beyond. So I think the character builder is the real tricky part. Now, as far as like one independent person making a character builder for 5e is really tough. It's not impossible. So Morris over at EN World and EN Publishing has been making a character builder for Level Up Advanced 5e. And his original statement was, we don't have $140 million to spend on this, so it's not like we're going to have one like D&D Beyond. And then later said, actually, this character builder is really good. We spent significantly less than $140 million on it, and we still have a very viable character builder. I haven't spent too much time with the character builder, so I don't know really how good it is. But I know it's really hard to make a good character builder. There are other ways to do character builders like I've seen. I think Alchemy VTT has like a 5e character builder that is much looser. Like it's almost like the PDF form fillable version of a character sheet, just in a web-based format. I'm actually not sure I think that might be a good way to go. And I think it might be a good way to go because you don't have to worry about every single nitpicky little rule that could change something on a character sheet, right? As if you've got open fields for it, if you have open fields for all the stat blocks, yes, it puts more of a burden on the player to actually do all the calculations themselves. But I think if you organize it well, I think that you can still walk a player through building a character without having to do all the auto-calculating aspects to it and give them a lot more ability to customize their own sheet the way they want it and even customize it for different versions of 5e. I have no idea if that's a good idea or not. I have no idea if that's viable or works. But for me, kind of the one, there's really two features for the 5e artisanal database that don't exist. And one of them is a character builder, and the other one is a virtual tabletop. And I don't really have plans on building either of those, right? I'm kind of covering all the other DM aspects in there. I don't know that I'm really ever going to do anything with those other two. But boy, I would love a really nice, clean, downloadable, self-hostable version of a 5e character builder that people could get that would be open source. That's sort of, to me, like the one thing I would really love to see. There are some out there, and I've played around with a few of them. And they can get complicated. The UI can be difficult to work with sometimes. So, but I don't know that it's an impossibility, but it's very clearly something hard to do. Caleb L. says, how do you incorporate OSR/Shadowdark sensibilities into a 5e game without undermining player choices or conflicting with 5e's core design philosophy? For instance, OSR games prioritize player ingenuity over dice rolls, but when I reward room searches based solely on how players describe their approach, rather than calling for perception checks, players who invest heavily in perception-based skills feel like their choices are meaningless. A lot of interesting things in here to unpack. So I'll start with the big one, and then we'll work down into some specifics. Shadowdark and OSR style games have a fundamentally different feeling than 5e games do. 5e games are heroic/super heroic fantasy. And OSR games are about sort of, they call them heroic fantasy, but they're not like character-based heroic fantasies. Death is right around the corner. You have to worry about food. You have to worry about light. You have to worry about fundamental things that are not what I would refer to as like super heroic, right? You're still casting spells and stuff, and that's pretty crazy. And that difference really started to appear in the second edition, late second edition, where you started to have the complete books that gave a lot new character options to characters. And then third edition and above, we really saw that a shift in the way that the game operates between older versions of D&D and newer versions of D&D. And whenever you're trying to get one of them to feel like the other, it's not going to work perfectly well. I brought up an example, I think it was earlier today on my Lazy RPG prep show, where there's a certain point where the characters gain multiple superpowers that Marvel superheroes would have. Invisible Woman can turn invisible, but a D&D wizard can turn invisible and throw fireballs and polymorph into a Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? Any one superhero could do one of those things, but D&D characters can do multiples of those things. Now, it's also true they could do those things even in the old school versions of them. But again, when you have things like light and rations and storage, how much inventory slots do you have? It's a different kind of game. And so anytime you're trying to turn 5e into Shadowdark, you're going to struggle with some of this stuff, like Goodberry. I had a player, I remember it was like in the first episode of my Tales of the Valiant game, they got a stone that at will could light up. And they were like, if we had this in Shadowdark, it would have destroyed the entire game. Right? And we got it in our first adventure in Tales of the Valiant, right? It was just a simple gemstone that had the light cantrip, and whoever was holding it could cast light and it would illuminate. And they're like, that would have completely changed Shadowdark, right? And that's what I mean about the different feelings of these games. In Tales of the Valiant, that's not even that good a magic item. It's a common magic item, right? But in Shadowdark, completely ruins it. Goodberry, the ability to eat food and have rations continually, completely changes the game. So that's the big side. When you're trying to turn one game into a different kind of game, especially when you're talking about like OSR/Shadowdark versus 5e, you're going to struggle with some of this stuff. I think it's just fundamental to the way the game is designed. But now diving into some of the other stuff, for example, the idea of like challenging players versus challenging characters, there is some things that we can do in here. One of them, for example, is a big one that I go with is what does perception actually show you? So you don't want to remove the fact that players gave their characters and took choices that give their characters a good perception check, right? By saying, well, you didn't say exactly what you were looking for, so your perception check doesn't matter. You don't want to do that. But that doesn't mean that perception tells you everything. It doesn't mean that it gives you this perfect sight where you're like Sherlock Holmes and you picked out every single grain of sand and figured out how it got there. Perception just kind of gives you a feeling for things. So somebody with a good perception might say, there's something odd about that door. There's something weird about the tiles on the floor in this hallway, right? There's something strange about the way the light is reflecting. There's an air current in this room that doesn't seem to be coming from the door that you opened, but you're not sure where. Perception tells you information that you can then use to investigate stuff, right? And that's where the difference between perception and investigation comes from. Perception is an initial feeling. Investigation is actually doing something. A lot of times you can think of the skills and the role that they make as sort of a baseline that they do. right? That they still have to do things, but you don't want to, if they roll a certain value and it's high, you can say, look, you're going to succeed, but you're going to learn more if you do a more thorough investigation. The same way if somebody does a very good job of role-playing, right? They're role-playing with a character, and they do a really good job. And then you say, that's great, roll a charisma check. And they're like, are you kidding? My charisma is -2, right? Like, I suck at charisma. You're going to make me roll? I just did this big role-play thing. You say, you already convinced them. But we're gonna play off of how the roll does to see like how well you convince them. Or did you get even beyond that? So you can use even in-game descriptions as the baseline, and then the roll can only go up from there. That way you're not punishing them in either case. If they did a good job of describing, they've hit a baseline. That means that they cannot fail because they did such a good job of describing what they're going to do. On the same side of rolling, if they roll really well, that's their baseline. And you know that they can't do worse than that based on the description of what they do. I think what you want to avoid is discounting or removing the agency of the character for having these good abilities and skills. Right? If they went through the trouble of getting them, and if they rolled a good roll, you don't want them to say like, well, yeah, but you didn't say that you looked under the door. This is that idea that traps are best when they're found, right? That traps aren't really that much fun when they're triggered. They're more fun when they're found and disarmed. And when the risk of disarming them is risky and they succeed, now that feels good. Even if they trigger it, when they knew it was there and something bad happened that triggered it, that's way better than, you know, hey, I've got a passive of 15, but I didn't say specifically that I was looking at this thing, and then I stepped on a tile and I got shot with a poison arrow in the eye, right? You don't really want them to feel penalized because they didn't say the right thing. So I think it's also interesting to understand where passives came from and why passive skills exist. Passive skills, particularly passive perception, exists so that you don't waste a lot of time having players poking every single tile in every single room of every dungeon they ever go through. Right? Passive checks are there to streamline gameplay so that the players can walk through a hallway and know if we have passive perceptions that are pretty good, we'll notice things. But you don't have to say exactly what they find. Instead, you could say, there's just something off. Some of the tiles are colored differently than the other tiles, or they seem to have different wear on them than the other tiles. And then they can go through the process of doing investigation. I'm not really a big fan of passive investigation, by the way. I know it's on the character sheet, but I don't know that I ever use passive investigation for anything, because I feel like investigation is, by its nature, an active thing that you're doing. Insight, I could see passive insight. Passive insight is sort of like passive perception, but for people, right? Passive insight means, you know, there's something off about this guy. You don't know what it is. They're nervous and you don't know why, right? And then you can do further like investigation checks, or you use your other charisma-based checks to try to understand what it was that you might have seen. But understanding what they see with passives, like passive perception, passive insight, that they're not decoding the entire situation, unless you, of course, want them to. You can always decide to give them more information if you want to. But in general, you get to decide what they learned, but you don't want to take away the fact that the characters spent their time investing in their characters in order to have these abilities. You want to make sure that they're getting a benefit from that. So I really feel like that's kind of a difference between like how Shadowdark works and how other OSR games work and how 5e works. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in tabletop role-playing games. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did and you want to see more stuff like this, please consider subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. There is a link down in the show notes. It is absolutely free to sign up, and you get a free adventure generator for signing up. You can also support me directly on Patreon. Patrons get access to things like the 5e artisanal database, bunch of different adventures, whole bunch of stuff that you get, access to our awesome Discord server, and you help support this show and all of the other work that I do. And you can pick up any of my books at the Sly Flourish bookstore. Right now, we are having a sale for 20% all of our books with free shipping in the United States for $60 or more. Please check it out below. Thank you very much. Have a great day and get out there and play an RPG.